Tov, the day after Yom Kippur, preparing for Sukkot. Sukkot is the most beautiful holiday. It is the embodiment of being embraced, that you have a mitzvah that you live inside the sukkah that is surrounded. It has to have three walls, just like the arm has three main sections to it, representing the idea that God's with you in everything. You're supposed to live in the sukkah, so God's with you in everything you do in it. It comes about through a process in the calendar. We just had Yom Kippur. That's a time of self-reflection. You bring yourself down in a sense because you focus on where you have room for improvement. So that's a process of bringing down your self-esteem in a way. But it empowers, when you do that once a year, it empowers you to celebrate whatever good accomplishments you have and empowers you to make more improvements for the future. So that Sukkot is recognizing that your efforts pay off, and now it's time to celebrate that. We hold a lulav as a victory sword, or the opposite of a sword, a plowshare, a beautiful symbol. Welcome. I can't quite read your name. It says Dot. Oh no, it's the other side. Shaya Feynman. Okay, welcome Shaya Feynman. I hope I pronounced that right. So that's Sukkot. Sukkot is after you've done the work, your self-reflection and trying to be very discerning with yourself. You celebrate your relationship with God. That now you're so pure and holy and ready to have nothing in the way to interfere. What I think is the most important thing about our religion is to experience it. It should be visceral. That word, nobody even knows what it means. The Rebbe calls it Mamash, the Hebrew word Mamash. Shana Tova to you. Thank you for listening. Mamash is, and the word is often applied to the immediacy of what the Rebbe is speaking about, a type of redemption that's taketh miyad mamish. It's something that's literally immediate. So here Mamashes means something tangible. The Rebbe says when we say Shechianu, we said Shechianu on Yom Kippur, even though there was no Kiddush. We said Shechianu on the day itself. Higianu is lahagia, nageya means to touch. Something that's relevant, something that has an impact, something where it affects you. That's mamashes, that's tangible, visceral, that I think is the key word here. Judy, experience. You can't take someone's word for it anymore. Moshiach is about re'iyah, vision. Vision is tangible. When seeing is believing, you can't be a judge if you've seen an event. You have to be told about it, because once you've seen it, you already know. You're not going to listen to another way of looking at it. So vision is visceral, it's experiential. Chokhmah is associated with vision. It means experience, something that you haven't yet absorbed. Bina is absorbing that experience. Understanding, Bina. Tishrei is all about the journey of Bina, understanding. So, okay, that's Sukkot. I want to segue into what I'm learning about, which is in preparation. Well, the Rebbe said it before Simchas Torah. And also, it's a combination of two talks. One that is said in Chol Hamoed, Sukkot, and the night and the day of Simchas Torah. So you put a lot of stuff together, and the Rebbe edits it, and it becomes spectacular, not an essay, but as if it was spoken. It's much more lucid that way. Not conversational in a way, like dialectic. And it's the depth and all the ramazim go into the footnotes. So it's a very fascinating adventure if you're into that. Elsewise, I hope I break it down for you. And so the Rebbe speaks about two Torahs, that in the ultimate time of Jewish blossoming, renaissance and redemption in the world, we're going to have Beis Hillel, Beis Shammai at once. Think about what that means. Welcome. We're going to have Nasis Torah Kashtei Teres. When you had this conflict of a whole spectrum of opinion going from one extreme to the other, Beis Hillel, Beis Shammai, it's like you have two Teres. You have two sets of sagely people in two different groups with two different, totally different approaches to life. One exists in potential, and one exists in reality. We're going to pass like Beis Shammai, which is, I think, the potential. Seeing the virtue of the potential. Don't even forget about what. I think that's the way the Rebbe defines the two. But the point here is that this difference, the Rebbe here describes it as chesed and gvura, severe or benevolent and severe. I should put it in the right order. Beis Hillel, incidentally, was meant to be more kind and accepting, saying this too can be elevated. This also can be a part of, and Beis Shammai was more strict. So it's interesting that becomes the reference, at least for the first stage of redemption. You think the opposite. Why would you go to a more strict opinion? Where at times it's freedom, let your free flag fly, in the words of Sean Hannity. So that was described as, the Gemara Sanhedrin describes it as if there were two terrorists. But we say that Elu ve'elu divrei Elokim Chaim. Both are words of the living God. That precept will be lived in the final stage. When the ultimate completion of humanity, you're going to have opposites living together as one. Everyone is going to simply mind their own business. And that is redemption. The Rebbe says here, mitzvahs betelas lasad lave. There will be no mitzvahs anymore. There's almost an accident right in front of me. Both people could have calmed down there a little bit. If you see someone going into your lane wrongly, you let the guy go. If a bull was charging at you, what would you do? Just drive forward? ignoring him? Let the bull go first. So the bull and the lamb will lie with the lion will lie with the lamb, and the kid's going to have his foot on the viper's nest, or the hole where the viper lives. There's going to be an existence of two impossibilities together as one. Though it's called the Rebbe refers to it in Hasidic terminology, nimna ha-nimnois, the impossible impossibility. It means you could have two things at once. You could have the viper and the kid's heel in the same space, and they're not going to be in conflict with each other. The wolf will lie with the lamb thing, okay? So it looks like there are two terrorists, but what's going to happen? We're going to somehow segue into this Beis Shammai world for a maximum of 40 years. Isaiah says Tchias HaMeisim, the general Tchias HaMeisim has to be at the end of a period of 40 years, in which time you have to have the Holy Temple. So, and then you have the general Tchias HaMeisim, you have people sprouting up all over like Cabbage Patch Kids. And righteous Cabbage Patch Kids, if you can imagine such a thing. So that will be a stage where there is no mitzvahs anymore, because we're going to paskin like both voices in Torah. As long as it has a Torah perspective, that's considered something. The Rabbi explains with the dimension that exists to make that happen. It's a metaphysical reality that exists, that there's something called the Ratz, and there's the will of God. That's eternal. God's will is, he decides. Okay, there's this whole discussion that was fascinating. The Ikarim, this Jewish philosophy, speaks about that mitzvahs will change. Just like a child grows up, he weans himself off milk, and he starts eating bread. Meat and wine. So that's his new mitzvah. His new mitzvah is get off the milk and move on to something a little bit more gratifying and sophisticated. ultimately with wine, which always represents pleasure. And bina, usually too. Understanding. So, the will of God is something that's eternal, unchangeable. Okay, we have the Ikarim. Mitzvahs can change because the needs of the time change. He describes it, the Ikarim describes it as hachanas hakelim, I think is the word to describe it, which means that it's relative to your perspective. Hachanas hakelim, the way you prepare your mindset, so depending on that, mitzvahs are required. In other words, if you mature from the infant stage of requiring mitzvahs that are described as milk, you go up in maturity, spiritual maturity, to take on a different, you can say the mitzvahs can change. And he gives proof, incredible proof. He slugs up the Rambam. Who could do such a thing? He brings a proof that, Adam Arishan had 6 mitzvahs. He was not allowed to eat meat. He was a vegan. And Noach was the first person, Noah's Ark, he was the first person that was permitted to eat meat without transgressing. So, and then you had the giving of the Torah, 613, but they happen also in time. Abraham was uncircumcised till 99 years old, and he was the holiest man that ever walked the face of the earth, besides maybe Adam Arishan. So that's a fascinating, and also the altars that they made often had, at a certain time in history, were made out of a single stone, and that was a good thing. I think the Abbas did that, and that became forbidden in Matan Torah. So you're not allowed to have a single stone, a monolith, as your altar. That's a nice haiku. Okay, so what's going to happen in the world is you're going to morph from a mission. Welcome. We're going to morph from a mission of acceptance of a mitzvah, which means you have an opportunity to do God's will. You can have a possibility of not doing that. And a mitzvah, by doing that, you bond yourself to God. There's something that we're going to raise our consciousness to a level where you are simply going to reflect the will of God like a chariot of heaven or something like that, that you're simply there's not going to be any difference between your will and God's will. You're both going to see eye to eye perfectly, and everything you do will be as holding hands together as one. So there's going to be this camaraderie and this harmony or synchronization, like the synchronized swimming. Perfect example. But in talking about in terms of what God happens to want at that instant, that will be completely aligned. That's called the will of God. Sometimes the will of God, even according to halacha, a prophet can, if he's told, is allowed to transgress any single mitzvah except one thing, worshiping idolatry or getting other people to. Any other thing for him is considered a mitzvah if he's so told by God. The only other exception to that is pikuach nefesh in all cases but 3. Not to murder, not to have adultery, and not to worship idolatry. So those 3 things are, but the only remaining one for a prophet, if he's told, is he can never worship idolatry. God would never ask him to do that. Think about, though, interestingly, the theater of the focus of what we just celebrated, Yom Kippur, which celebrates the Kohen Gadol, the most devoted of all people in the nation, going into the Holy of Holies. So there in the Holy of Holies, they were actual statues, just done in a specific way. You're not meant to worship those statues. They're supposed to be an idea to embody visually, so you could be able to relate to it, but it's not gone to except once a year. The Rebbe says the true place of every Jew is, incidentally, in the Kodesh HaKodashim. We bring that level of sanctity to all of our things, but ultimately that is our true place. So at that level, when everything is based on God's will, there is no place for a mitzvah. You can never be told to do something you don't want to do. There's a process, though, of expanding from a mortal conscious ego to the infinite. Welcome. I just said the infinite and someone walks in. So that is the whole process. I've been writing some haikus now that's trying to give a different sort of a depth to what prayer is, and how redemption and prayer are basically synonymous. So here we're talking about a state where you're going to have the halacha as both chesed and gvura at once. If people mind their own business and let people have their authentic journeys in that space, that is basically what Olam HaTchiyah, the world of resurrection of the dead, is meant to embody. You could live that now simply by minding your own business, and I'm sure that will elevate you. I'm just saying in things that you don't understand. You're not the judge of that. So when you remove that judgment, that instinctual judgment that we have, you give a space for something that's just, you don't understand everything. So God didn't make you the judge of every person. Trust that there's order in the universe. There is a master of this world. Even as simply as understanding that there's karma. It's such an obvious thing to more awoken people in the truest sense. So before we had the question of how could it be that Beis Shammai is going to be the upcoming stage of Messianic times begins with that. Why would you go more severe, right? Another way of looking at it is if you never had any desire to if God was so obvious, you'd probably want your fences a little bit more elaborate, and because there's no need to be out there as much. You don't have to. You understand what I'm saying? And then ultimately, when you could have both existing at the same time, because there's no possibility to do anything that's against God's will. Okay, I just want to maybe read a little bit of this, or maybe not. Okay, let's just skip to the end. The end is obviously Rambam's Lo Yiyeh Esa Kol Ha'olam Elul Dasas Hashem Bilvad. The whole point of it is meant to be something that's organically becomes the singular focus of the entire world, to a singular welcome, a singular purpose to know infinity. All the technologies and all the TikToks are going to be talking about the same thing. How can I have L'das es Hashem bilvad, the only preoccupation in the world? Everything else is going to be pampered for you, so that there's going to be guaranteed income, guaranteed, if everything's growing as like grass. Let them eat grass, let them eat cake. We're talking about a time where you won't have to worry about anything. So therefore, what are you going to do? All the people that are going to have sort of more superficial pursuits will not withstand that frequency. They're just, even if they exist, it's not part of history, and they will ultimately not. That will not exist. Ki malah haaretz deis Hashem, because the world will be filled with this thing called wisdom in God, or the knowledge of God. Knowledge is visceral. Mamash in Hebrew. Das is to feel a connection. Move and shemam and matzvah eina b'shvil eina ezmatara v'tachlis kadei Elahu atzmai hamatar v'tachlis. The Rambam ends suggesting this, that there is a time, the first days of Moshiach is going to be to build merit, to have time to devote yourself to build merit, and once you had that opportunity, then the merit pays off and you're zapped with Olam Atchiyah. You don't have to die to be resurrected. You can be lit with an infinite light that's meant to invigorate you in a way that you're just considered what I call a dim sum, because you dim the sun. If all of you reflects the ultimate purpose of what you're here for, you're supposed to become spectacular physically. That's the main place where God's sovereignty is meant to be celebrated and expressed, is in the physical world. It's the most important place for God to have a building in Jerusalem and say, this is the embassy of the universe. And it's meant to be that way. It's meant to be that certain people are supposed to carry the banner of virtue, to be expressed as a palace representing the singular devotion of the entire world to a common purpose of peace and integration. Monotheism is about finding your true place in this whole that requires every topping on the pizza all together. The everything bagel is a state where there is no in order to. That phrase won't exist anymore. What you do will be the meaning and purpose itself. So it's not in everything that you do until Olam Atchiyah is a means to something else. The only time that you actually will, the existence will be an end unto itself is Olam Atchiyah, which I'm suggesting you could do right now. Yeah, take it with me. I just live with that. Have a great day.